Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we pull our favorite books down off the shelf, dust them off, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. My name's Tom Galley, and joining me today we've got Tony Pasculi.
Glad to be back.
And today we are talking about one of my favorites, Phillip K Dick's A Scanner Darkly.
So always got to start with this question. Why is this one of your favorites?
Well, we've decided I've got a thing for broken characters.
This book is chock full of broken characters.
I don't think you could find any brokener characters, particularly than Bob Arctor. I don't know. This book is just such a mind trip. Okay, it starts as Phillip K Dick, so yeah. It's going to be left of center anyway, right? It's going to come from a weird perspective. It's going to have some unusual thoughts to it, and it's going to have some language that's just compelling, and it's going to have, messed up characters. Mm-hmm. But you've got a story here about about a law enforcement officer who has fallen so deep into the drug culture and been so affected by the substance that he no longer self-identifies. He literally forgets who he is. Well,
that's okay. So themes of identity and reality are pretty big in PKD's work all the time. Yeah. And this is one of those books that takes it to the extreme where his identity just gets lost, absolutely lost. And partly because of his profession, where he's wearing a scramble suit as a law enforcement officer, so no one can identify who he actually is. But also he's taking this drug, which literally starts to dissolve his brain.
Mm-hmm. And I haven't picked up on this before, but in the earliest part of the book, in the second chapter, right, he's giving a speech to an Elks Club or something like that. Mm-hmm. One of these upright, middle-aged person organizations. And the omniscient narrator refers to him as Arctor/Fred/whomever. Mm-hmm. This is not his brain being sloshed, and in fact, this is before he's really slid down the hill. This is the omniscient narrator standing back and saying, Bob Arctor/Fred/whoever said, it's a I don't even know if you can call that foreshadowing. That's foreslamming or yeah.
Well, he has at least 3 names in the book. I forget who's his drug identity name. Is it Bob?
Bob Arctor is the name he goes by
when he's undercover.
Yep.
And then Fred is his law enforcement name, and then later he becomes Bruce. But the omniscient narrator also makes a pun on Arctor actor at one point.
He does.
Yeah. So
usually I'm not a fan of omniscient narrators inserting themselves into the story, but for me at least it works in this particular one.
It is amusing. This is so I'm sorry. So go ahead. More about why this is your favorite book or one of your favorite books.
Well, like you said, this book is full of fractured characters. Now, the drug culture is something I've got some experience with, and I have a great deal of sympathy and empathy towards. Not the idea of addiction and the way that things do in fact destroy your brain and ruin your lives, but the idea of chasing this kind of what you feel like should be an innocent, harmless fun. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm doing these things so that it changes the way I see the world. My friends and I are together. We're safe. We're not doing anything bad, forgetting Donna for the moment. Mm-hmm. And all we want is to preserve this feeling. Right. All we want is to feel good, to be together, feeling good. And the consequences for playing like that are awful. They're horrific.
Yeah. It's interesting because I have probably much less experience with that culture than you do, but I have some. And intellectually, I'm right there. Intellectually, I'm just like, hey, people should take LSD and other mind-expanding drugs. They should experiment. They should be free. This is a very libertarian ideal. And at the same time, when I run up against it, I'm just like, I'm a little bit repulsed by this. Yep. Even in fiction, I'm just like, I'm immediately turned off by heavy drug-using characters. Even though intellectually I'm very sympathetic to it, but emotionally somewhere my Puritan upbringing kicks in and goes, no, bad, and this spells doom for you, which it does usually.
Well, it does actually. Nobody survives this. It's kind of like Hunchback of Notre Dame. Nobody gets out of this, intact.
Yeah,
but I think he does a really fantastic job of conveying that dichotomous behavior where what I'm after is this thing. I just want to feel good. I want to be around my friends and feel good, and that's all I want. And yet the more they pursue it, the more unobtainable it becomes, right? As their lives begin to degenerate, as their cognitive abilities begin to degenerate, and they don't realize that they're degenerating. They don't realize what's going wrong. All they know is it's a very childlike view. I was happy. I took this thing. It made me happy. Now I need to take more of this thing, and I'm still not happy.
So I don't know if you remember subliminal ads, which were a big thing in the, okay. And there was a belief among some marketing firms that anyone who drank alcohol wasn't drinking it for pleasure. They were drinking it because they secretly wanted to destroy themselves. And so their subliminal ads, they would airbrush shapes into the ice cubes in a glass of scotch. They wouldn't airbrush in like sexy women or anything like that. They would airbrush in skulls. These are real ads that you can find. Yeah. And so I've always kind of believed that about people who do, especially, I mean, drugs come in a wide variety, but a drug called death.
One does wonder about the choice of the street name there.
Yeah. I think there's an aspect where people are drawn to not the pleasure or the euphoria so much as they're drawn to the certainty. It's like, I have chosen my path and all my decisions are made for me now. I get up in the morning and I have to get this drug. And then when I run out of this drug, I have to do whatever it takes to get money so I can get more of this drug. And life becomes very simple and very clear. And I think that's really appealing in some ways. And acknowledging that it's absolutely horrible and that people don't enjoy it, that there's some appeal there in that absolute black and white certainty.
Yeah, the psychology of addiction is certainly complex and Byzantine, and I think still today poorly understood thing. And part of that is why I like this. You know, you've got somebody, and you know, if you read the afterword, clearly he was on this journey, right? And in fact, he is one of the names in the end that it's dedicated to. He has pancreatic damage. You know, but the list of friends that he played with that are either dead or, you know, in permanent psychosis, there were more than 2 or 3 that were permanent psychosis. I mean, he's seen this from the inside.
That is fascinating to me. And that was not the impression I got as I was reading the book. I was reading this as a straight science fiction novel. And I'm like, I don't know if science fiction applied to the drug culture is all that credible here. I feel like he's skidding around a bunch of stuff and making up a bunch of stuff and explaining a bunch of stuff. I felt like he had no contact with the drug culture until I skipped ahead to the afterword and realized, no, it's exactly the opposite.
Yep.
That it didn't feel as grounded to me, at least in the first half. The second half it did. The second half, it felt like he captured the existential despair of these drug users very, very effectively. It's very bleak, a very bleak book.
It is. Well, you know, and we pick up the story. You know, Arthur is still on the functioning side of the fence. You know, and then we get to take the journey to the other side along with him, which is it turns out a very short journey once it starts. So
there's a thing that happens in the end where he ends up checking into rehab. The one of the rehabs that's available, I forget which one it is. New Path. Okay.
New Path. It's actually the only one that's available.
Okay. And they have a policy that won't take anyone who's not completely desperate and broken and obviously hit rock bottom. It's like if you're not quite at rock bottom, but you want to turn your life around, they're not interested.
Yeah.
And it turns out that this is their policy because they're trying to keep law enforcement out, because they're the ones that are distributing this drug. So there's an allusion to this, and I'm not sure how clear it is, and maybe you're more familiar with this book than I am, that Bob/Fred has undertaken this horribly destructive journey, in a sense, voluntarily, in order to go.
Well, they explicitly tell us that's not true, right? Yeah. Because at the end, you've got Donna Hawthorne talking with the other undercover agent who's, I don't remember his name. He's not in the book often enough to be important, but he works as an intaker for New Path, but that's as far as he can get. But they're talking about the fact that they have done this to Bob. They have sacrificed Bob without Bob's knowledge.
Okay.
This was a choice that was made for him. His volunteering was that he signed up to be a law enforcement officer.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's some unexplored, throughout the story, he presents to us this fact that he used to live a different life. He used to live with a wife and 2 kids.
He used to have a very normal, even successful, happy life.
He tells us this,
Yeah.
right? And again, we even get the omniscient narrator talking about the moment when it changed. He bangs his head in the kitchen and he suddenly realized that he hated his life. And yet, as we get further into it, we're given reason to think that none of that is actually true, right? The police officers or his superior, who secretly turns out to be Donna, is like, "No, you don't have kids. You can't have kids. We wouldn't have taken you for this job if you had kids."
Mm-hmm.
So there's untruth going on from the omniscient narrator again as well.
Yeah. So again, PKD plays with the idea of, in all his work, of what is real and what is not real, and what is perception and what is identity, and especially what is identity in the face of mixed or unclear reality. And this for me, I've only read a couple of his short stories and one other novel, and this is by far his most successful book. It's coherent, it holds together, it hits those themes pretty hard, interesting ways, and it goes off on tangents. There's a lot of tangents here.
There are a lot of tangents.
But there are not as many as in, say, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, where I couldn't even tell you what the plot of that book is.
Indeed.
Yeah. So this is this is a very coherent book for PKD. And very, I mean, again, I didn't like the first half of it as much, but once you get on the train, there's a lot of sort of preamble, I feel like. And then there's a dark period, which is pretty bleak and hard to get through. But then it really picks up. And this is just kind of an amazing book. Yeah.
It really is. And in terms of film adaptations, I think this is probably one of the best film adaptations I've ever seen. You
had mentioned that, and that's interesting too. And it's been a long time since I've seen the film. I need to watch it again. But I had a completely different impression of this story from the film than I did from the book. Yes.
What impression did you get from the film?
That the film focused much more. Well, it cut away a lot of the tangential stuff, and it was much more focused on this idea of reality, split reality, and split identity, and sort of the meta-ness of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And there was less of the just absolute despair of the drug culture.
Yeah.
So
a lot does get left out, as happens when you. Yeah. This is not a particularly large novel, but still squeezing it down to a 2-minute runtime or 2-hour runtime.
Yeah.
I love with the movie the fact that they chose to rotoscope the entire thing.
Yeah.
Because just from the get-go, it puts us into this questionable what is reality mode.
Exactly.
And at least, for me, you get about 20 or 30 minutes in and you stop seeing the rotoscoping. And then when they actually use it to deliberately play, he sees the illusion of Robert Downey Jr. turning into a dung beetle. And then when you see, he's sleeping with the hooker who suddenly turns into Donna and then turns back again, right?
Yeah.
They don't use that way very often, but it becomes really effective because the entire world has been rotoscoped and we've stopped seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So we start from a basic level of unreality, so it's easier to shift farther along that axis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
But you're right, a lot of the tangential stuff gets left out. In the movie, we don't at all explore Donna Hawthorne, which, since she's played by one of my least favorite actresses of all time, I think is a good thing. But
who's that? I don't remember.
Winona Ryder.
Winona
Ryder.
Okay.
But that doesn't get explored. They consolidate a couple of characters, right? So in the movie, it's Charles Freck, who's the one that thinks the aphids are attacking them, whereas the book, it's another character that's only there to be disposed of.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Interesting. So I listened to part of this on audiobook, not a big part. And Paul Giamatti reads the audiobook.
Hey.
And reads it very well. Yeah.
I would think so.
Yeah. So that was fun.
So and again, Phillip K Dick has got his own unique voice. There are things, there's so many things in this book that jump out at me. But one of them I like, they were talking about there's a story where there's several of these drug friends hanging out, and a straight, as they call them, comes into the apartment to get him to come over and kill a bug. And this is how he's thinking of her. Her heart, Bob Archer reflected, was an empty kitchen. Floor tile and water water pipes, and a drain board with pale scrubbed surfaces, and one abandoned glass on the edge of the sink that nobody cared about.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
One of the things that struck me about this book that was surprising, because this is not how I think of Dick's work at all, is how funny it was in places. There were some really good one-liners that are delivered so dryly that you could just sort of blow through them and not realize. But a lot of those drug-addled conversations between him and his roommates are hysterical.
Yep.
They are so funny.
And that the bicycle, the 10-speed or the 12-speed.
Oh yeah.
Well, in the book, it's a 10-speed, right? Or,
yeah. It's a 10-speed, and they convince themselves because there's 2 gears in the front and 5 in the back. There's only 7 speeds, so they lost 3 speeds somewhere.
And as you're reading these, you can put yourself in that, following the logic thing. What you don't know, like when Barris is trying to calculate the velocity of, or the mass of the inertia of his moving car.
Yeah.
It's like, how much does this car weigh? Well, it's 1,000 pounds. You sure about that? It's 1,000 pounds fully loaded with 10 people. That's 1 in the front and 9 in the back. So it doesn't fish, And it's like, okay. Now the question is, are they deliberately yanking him along, or are they actually lost in this fantasy themselves?
That was, in fact, this is one of the quotes I highlighted, when they're having the conversation about the 10-speed, and that turns out to be a significant plot point, because this is when they diagnose that Fred, the agent, is dysfunctional because he was going along with this, and they're like, you didn't know. You didn't know. You weren't just having drug talk with these guys. You literally didn't know. And he goes, oh, okay, well, I'll do better next time. And they say, next time what? When you buy a ripped off 10-speed bike, or abstracting all daily perceptible input? Yeah. Yep. That was hilarious.
Yep. I love the 2 doctors too. I love the fact, and the whole thing about his condition is that the left brain and right brain have stopped communicating.
Yes.
Right. And then you've got these 2 doctors, one of whom is very, qualitative, and one of whom is more, quantitative. So again, you've got a left brain, right brain doctor feeding him occasionally synonymous and occasionally contradictory information.
There's a lot of German interpolated into the text at that point. Did you translate it?
I did not.
Me neither.
That annoys me. And it's weird. It reminds me of, oh my God, the other weird sci-fi author, Slaughterhouse-Five, Vonnegut. Vonnegut does that on occasion, throws in some alternate language passages there. What I found weird, though, was later when he's reviewing the tapes of himself, he's actually saying that out loud. I assumed that it was, Vonnegut inserting himself or some sort of mental. No, he's actually vocalizing these things. I bet you if I had looked it up, somebody has taken the time to go through and translate all those passages.
I meant to do it, and I ran out of time. I just copy them into Google Translate, and I just didn't. And my if it's Spanish, I could probably muddle through. In German, no, I'm hopeless. So here's the thing about the split brain stuff. Have you read a book called The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind?
No.
By Julian Jaynes. This is a nonfiction book, which is fascinating. And there's not a lot of support for it as a theory, but it's one of those things that's just so interesting that that it's worth thinking about. And his idea is that in the past, even as recent as Homer, that the 2 halves of the brain were not as unified as they are today. They were physically unified, but they were not psychologically unified. And so they operated almost independently. And so when people got thoughts from their right hemisphere, they didn't know where they were coming from. So they assumed that these were the gods talking to them.
Oh.
Yeah. And then eventually learned to incorporate those into their unified identity. And so they, there was no need for gods, but, it's fascinating. So that's where consciousness came from, the 2 halves sort of communicating with each other and creating a sense of other that says, well, if there's someone else out there, there must be a me that's not else. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this was interesting, and it takes it in the other direction. You start with a unified whole and you split it into 2. Yeah. And then these 2 things are sort of at odds with each other, sitting in the same head, but having 2 different minds.
Neat.
So the other thing that I thought was interesting about this is that Phillip K. Dick wanted to write it as a straight novel. He did not want to make it a science fiction novel. And then he didn't know if he could sell it and or pull it off. And so he added science fiction elements to it because that's what he was known for.
But in a way, this is, you're justified earlier in saying, I don't know if this is a science fiction novel, right? Because, I mean, compared to when he wrote it, but I mean, if we look at the world around us today, you know, the scanning devices, that idea is not very far removed from what modern technology is, what we're walking around with in our pockets.
Yeah.
The idea that a designer drug could come out that, you know, is this devastating is not very far removed from reality. The idea that a grassroots organization ostensibly dedicated towards making people better could actually be a covert terrorist organization and have federal protection. It's not at all far-fetched. Yep. There's very little science and or fiction involved in the even the roots of this story.
The suit, what was the suit called?
The scramble suit?
The scramble suit, yeah. Which was fascinating. And I think overly detailed description, which makes it less interesting. But we have things like that now. We have scanners everywhere. Like in London, there's closed circuit TV everywhere, and there are glasses you can get which will defeat those scanners. So you're invisible to cameras, and they just look like normal glasses. Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, arguably, much like Star Trek, arguably this is not really a science fiction book. This is a statement. This is a commentary on a culture and an attitude towards a culture. Social commentary disguised as science fiction to make it palatable. Yeah.
But I find it quite palatable. I really do. I mean, you're right. It's a disturbing book. It's nothing at all remotely happy. Despite there are, like you said, elements of comedy in there. Surprisingly far into it, there's still elements of comedy.
Pretty dark comedy.
Yeah.
Oh, the title. So this is the other thing I meant to do. I did look up the quote, which I thought was from Shakespeare, but apparently not. It's from the Bible. It's from Corinthians, and I just, I didn't read the whole passage, so I just don't know the context. And he does draw a parallel to it. He does call out the biblical reference in the book. But I got nothing. Than that. Yeah, okay.
It's a neat name, Yeah. And in terms of, I mean, often, Dead Bang for some reason comes to mind. This is a movie that somebody heard a phrase and they made an entire movie, and buried 2/3 of the way through, they find a reason to have the lead character say, "You had me, Dead Bang," and move on. It's like, okay, I've never heard that before, but you've heard it and you made an entire movie about it, and you had to say the words in the movie. But
I have not heard of that movie.
Well, you're not missing anything. Okay. It was a cheap action flick from the late 80s, early 90s. But this, I thought they did a really beautiful job. The way that, when he actually utters the words or thinks the words, "a scanner darkly." Yeah. I thought it really felt natural. So sidebar, Napoleon Dynamite, sort of the defining movie of its era. Yeah. The screenwriter who wrote, and I believe directed it also off their own screenplay, wrote that movie because they met someone named Napoleon Dynamite. Huh. Who was nothing like the character from the film. They just said, that is an incredible name. I'm going to put that name in my notebook and I'm going to write an entire movie around that name. And they did. There you go. Yeah. So maybe this started the same way. Maybe it started, he was reading Corinthians and thought, hey, this is the vehicle I can use to tell the story. Instead of a glass darkly, it'll be a scanner darkly, because we've replaced mirrors and windows with technology. Indeed. Yep. So there's one more thing that, again, this book is just chock-a-block full of stuff that sticks with me. And, if you look up a scanner darkly quotes, you'll come to dozens of web pages with hundreds of quotes. But in this dark world where he now dwelt, ugly things and surprising things, and once in a long while, a tiny wondrous thing spilled out at him constantly. He could count on nothing. I love the phrasing of that. It's contrasting this to his supposed previous suburban life, where everything was predictable and mundane and safe. There's an incident I liked. I don't remember the context for this. I highlighted just this quote. But they're talking about a guy. So there's that book, Catch Me If You Can, about Frank Abagnale, who's a famous, who impersonated a bunch of, he pretended to be a doctor, pretended to be a lawyer. And so there's an anecdote in this book about a guy who hears about someone like that. He says, I could do that. I could pretend to be a doctor. I could pretend to be a lawyer.
And he goes, you know what? I'm just going to skip all those middle steps and just pretend to be an imposter.
Yep.
He's a pretend imposter. That is the most Phillip K Dick thing ever.
A meta imposter. Yep. There's just so much to enjoy about this thing, though. Yeah.
There really is.
And I love, and again, just, another example of the schism occurring in his head. But, when he's there at the house in the moment and he's involved in these pointless conversations, that when he's there in the book, we get 2 or 3 pages of it. And then later he goes back to the safe house to review the recordings, and he'll start a conversation. He'll realize it's going nowhere. He'll fast forward 2 hours and the conversation is continuing, almost as if no fast forwarding, that it's almost like the same line of thought is still continuing.
Yeah. One of his superiors is like, you're wearing yourself out on these tapes. You just got to skip forward 6 hours, see if anything changed, and then backtrack to where it changed rather than going forward in real time, because you'll wear yourself out. There's another thing that I liked, which is sort of different. The idea of drugs as less of an altered state or a self-medicating thing, and more of a place, or even a fantasy place, almost like a portal fantasy. Yep. So there's a guy at one point who takes a certain combination of drugs, and he sees this mystical doorway. And everywhere he looks, he sees this mystical doorway. And it never occurs to him to try to go through it until he stops seeing it. And then he spends the rest of his life regretting that he never walked through the door.
Never occurred to him.
Yeah. And then there's another place where I think this is our main character saying this. He's talking about getting off and getting clean. And if he does, he will leave everything behind. It's like moving to a new country. He doesn't make this parallel explicitly, but if he gets clean, he will say goodbye to all his friends and everything he knows. He has to leave all that behind to be clean.
Yeah.
And that's part of what holds him there, is his connections to the people and places.
Until he's just a burned out husk and can do nothing else.
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was a little bit interesting about this, they don't really explore what it's like to be on substance D. Well, I guess in a way the whole book's an exploration of that. But they don't ever talk about, what it does, what you feel like, how it changes your perceptions, what you think. And we know that people do this in a variety of ways. Some people take it orally, some people inject it, some people mix it with meth, some people mix it with heroin. It's very multi-purpose drug, apparently, but we never get a description of exactly what it is, what the high is, other than seeing this skewed world through the eyes of the characters.
I don't know that there is a high. I don't know that there's a positive to this. They mostly talk about in terms of its addictive qualities. And in fact, they specifically mention that one of the marketing tactics is to drug people with something else and then forcibly inject them with substance D until they're hooked on it.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, if that starts recruiting people, not just like, hey, try H, it's amazing. It's like, we're going to knock you down and drug you. And so you have to have this. So, yeah, I could be wrong, but I don't recall anyone ever getting onto substance D because it's good or they like it.
You get, like when they're broken down on the side of the road, and Barris hands them some D. So let's take a little bit of D and drop a couple of hits and mellow out.
Yeah.
And Donna says the same sort of thing. We'll drop some death. We'll drink some tequila. We'll go see some movies,
Yeah.
And again, there we are mixing death and alcohol.
Yeah.
And driving. The Donna, it's been a while since I read this. The Donna character is a lot more interesting to me in the book than she is in the film. Even ignoring the fact that I'm not fond of the actress, she has substance in this. Hard to swallow substance. I mean, for being a law enforcement officer, the fact that she steals absolutely everything she owns.
Yeah.
The story about her ripping off the Coke truck was, I thought, hilarious.
One of the things that was interesting was, so when I found out that Donna was also a narc, and it's like, well, you have Bob, the main character, literally spying on himself. Mm-hmm. And then you have one of his housemates who is supposed to be spying on, well, he's not supposed to be spying on him, but Bob is in there because he's a person of interest, and he's reporting back to the police. So he's narking on the guy who's spying on him. And then Donna turns out to be also a narc, and just like, who at this point is not? Yeah. Who at this point is actually an average citizen?
Right. Apparently Luckman was not.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got, what's his name? Barris is narking, but he's doing it to burn people, right? Yeah. We're not exactly sure his motivations are.
Yeah. It's like that scene in John Wick where it turns out that everyone in the square is an assassin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a John Travolta movie I remember that was like that, where he's a military investigator of some sort, and I think Demi Moore is in that one too. Or she's the investigator, and she comes and starts investigating this accidental death. And by the time you get through it, it turns out that absolutely everybody involved was an undercover agent. The only person that didn't know what was going on was the investigator, and there was no reason for the movie to have happened at all. You know, if somebody just sat down and said, "Here's what it is. Oh, by the way, we're all feds," right? You know. So yeah, I don't remember where we were going with that.
Yeah, I think there were a wake of those movies, it's just sort of a slew of those movies in the wake of Unusual Suspects. Everyone wanted to write the next Unusual Suspects. Yeah. So.
All right.
Concluding thoughts?
I took very few notes on this just because I felt like I was so familiar with it. Then again, this is one of those, I mean, I could just thumb through the book at random and pick passages that stick with me, that resonate for whatever reason. But I like this. And again, all right, I've got a thing for fractured characters. Yep. I'll come clean. I'll confess to that. But I really enjoy the way this book treats that, the way it treats, whether it was a conscious or an unconscious choice to start on this path. I love the way it takes us through this journey, where we've got a main character who starts one way and then literally loses track of who he is, no longer understands he's the same person.
Yeah.
You know, and then he ends up a drooling husk and slowly gets rebooted. But yeah, it's just, I don't want to use the word fun, but it's a fun journey.
It's not a fun journey.
It's a horrific journey, but it's portrayed in a way that I find compelling.
It is compelling journey. It is definitely that. So I'm sort of the opposite of you. So your trope is broken characters and mine is hyper competent characters. And so as a general rule, I don't like unreality and I don't like lots of drug use because I don't know what's happening and I don't know what the stakes are. And there's a little bit of that in this book, but I think Phillip K. Dick is such a good writer that he makes this compelling anyway. I think in the hands of someone lesser, this would just be untenable. And this is, in fact, a very compelling book. So,
it is.
Yeah.
All right. So, what's up next?
So, up next, we are breaking out of the science fiction and fantasy mold for one of my favorite books called Confess Fletch, a comic murder mystery by Gregory MacDonald.
All right. Looking forward to that. And we will see you all in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.